She thought she was meeting the man of her dreams. 6 days later, only her remains were found. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Maria had opened her heart and her phone to hope. She'd been divorced for years, her life anchored in quiet routines and gentle smiles. When she swiped right on Alexander, something flickered in her again. Possibility. He seemed kind, thoughtful. Exactly what she'd been afraid she'd never find. On their 6th day chatting, he told her how much he admired her strength and that he couldn't wait to meet her. But 6 days later, what came back was silence. Not just from him, but from her. Her phone went unanswered. Her friends were worried. Then, her remains were discovered. It was all so sudden, so devastating. How did someone she trusted, someone she believed in, turn into her worst nightmare? Maria Thompson was a 40-year-old graphic designer from Toronto, known for her warmth, her quick laugh, and a love for the small joys in life: hiking on weekends, Sunday brunches with friends, and curling up with a good book. Her life was steady, predictable, and safe. She had never imagined that a swipe on a dating app could change everything. Alexander Hayes appeared to be the perfect match: kind, attentive, always knowing the right thing to say. He seemed genuine, someone who had also known loss, someone who understood her. But as the days passed and Maria vanished, a chilling reality began to emerge. Who was Alexander really? How could someone who seemed so charming, so normal, transform into a predator, hiding behind a carefully crafted mask? And perhaps the most haunting question of all, what did investigators uncover in the days following her disappearance that would shock the entire country? Maria's story would soon unravel in ways nobody could have predicted, leaving friends, family, and strangers asking the same question. Could this happen to anyone? Even someone like her? Maria Thompson had always been careful with her heart. After her divorce 3 years earlier, she had thrown herself into her work, creating stunning designs for small businesses across Toronto, and raising her 2-year-old son, Liam, on her own. Her apartment overlooked the bustling streets of the city. But inside, her world was quiet. Comforting mornings spent with a strong cup of coffee, afternoons sketching at her desk, evenings reading on the couch while Liam finished his homework. Friends described Maria as thoughtful, kind, someone who noticed the little things: a perfectly brewed cup of tea, a handwritten note, the way a plant could brighten a room. She'd been hurt before, yes, but that heartbreak had made her stronger, more aware, and cautiously optimistic. When her friend Julia insisted she try online dating, Maria hesitated. The thought of putting herself out there again felt vulnerable, almost risky. But Julia had said, "You deserve this. Don't let fear hold you back." So, Maria downloaded Tinder, creating a profile that was honest yet inviting. Divorced mom, creative soul, lover of books and the outdoors, looking for genuine connection. She wasn't searching for perfection, just someone who would see her for who she was. Alexander Hayes appeared in her matches like a bright spark. His photos showed a man with easy confidence, smiling at the camera, a golden retriever by his side. His profile described him as a widower who owned a small consulting business, someone who valued simple pleasures, walks in the park, quiet evenings at home, thoughtful conversation. When he first messaged Maria, his words were carefully measured, sincere, complimenting her taste in books and her perspective on life. Unlike the others, he didn't pressure her for a meetup or for personal details too quickly. There was something about his attentiveness, the way he remembered small details from their conversation, that made Maria feel comfortable, even excited. Friends noticed a light in her eyes that hadn't been there in years. But subtle things began to appear, almost imperceptible at first. He was always available, always responsive, too available. A few minor inconsistencies in his story surfaced, but they were easy to dismiss. A wrong town here, a mismatched workplace there. Maria, trusting and hopeful, overlooked them, believing that maybe he was simply private, cautious, or nervous. She hadn't yet imagined that these small cracks would lead to a chasm she could never escape from. The chemistry felt real, the attention flattering, and Maria allowed herself to imagine a life where she could be happy again. By the end of the week, their conversations had deepened, moving from casual messages to long phone calls, each ending with plans for a first meeting that promised to feel like the start of something special. She pictured a sunny afternoon, coffee in hand, laughter filling the space between them. What Maria couldn't have known was that Alexander had already planned every detail of that meeting, every twist and turn to ensure that hope, trust, and familiarity would leave her most vulnerable. But what started as a hopeful first date would turn into a nightmare she never saw coming. The Friday morning Maria had marked on her calendar arrived like any other, the sun streaming through her apartment windows, the smell of fresh coffee drifting from the kitchen, the soft hum of traffic below. But this day felt different. A flutter of excitement mixed with nerves had taken root in her chest. Alexander had texted early, confirming their lunch plans, asking if she preferred a cozy cafe downtown or a quiet park for a picnic. Maria chose the park, imagining a simple, pleasant afternoon, where she could finally see if their connection in conversation matched reality. Messages flew back and forth, playful and light, as Maria prepared. She dressed carefully, a comfortable yet elegant outfit, and slipped her phone into her bag, checking for any last-minute updates. Alexander's texts were punctual, warm, and attentive, yet somehow overly precise. He suggested he would pick her up, citing the weather and her busy schedule. Maria felt a surge of relief. The gesture seemed considerate, normal, kind. She didn't notice how smoothly he had orchestrated every detail, how little was left to chance. By mid-afternoon, Alexander arrived in a black SUV. He smiled, charming, perfectly put together, and greeted her with the kind of warmth that made her shoulders relax. Small talk filled the car as they drove through the city, laughter blending with the hum of the engine. But as they left familiar streets behind, moving toward suburban roads and eventually into areas she barely recognized, a subtle tension crept in. The GPS signal wavered, cell service dipped, and Maria noticed the quiet weight of isolation settling around them. When she asked about the route, Alexander explained it as a shortcut, one he knew well, meant to save time. His calmness seemed reassuring, almost too perfect, but a faint unease began to prick at the back of her mind. The last part of the journey was silent except for the occasional hum of the engine and the sound of tires crunching gravel. Maria's intuition nudged her, subtle as a whisper. She tried to shake it off, focusing instead on the small conversation bits, the stories he told about his business trips and childhood memories. But there was a shift, minor at first, a tightening in his jaw, a pause before answering her questions, a gaze that lingered just a moment too long. Maria didn't fully understand it yet, but the warmth that had drawn her in now carried a strange undertone, a weight that made her stomach twist. When they reached the clearing Alexander had described as perfect for a little walk and fresh air, Maria stepped out of the car, breathing in the scent of pine and wet earth. Everything seemed normal, peaceful even, and yet the absence of other people, the quiet of the forested area, made the world feel suspended in a fragile bubble. She laughed at a small joke he made, masking the rising tension she felt inside. Alexander suggested they take a short path that veered deeper into the woods, a detour he claimed offered the best view. Maria, trusting, followed, her bag swinging lightly against her hip, her phone still in her hand. Then came the moment when instinct and reality collided. Alexander's behavior shifted further. His voice, which had been smooth and easy, now carried a strange edge. His steps, once casual, were deliberate, measured. Maria sensed the walls of the clearing closing in, the isolation she had shrugged off, suddenly threatening. Confusion and fear began to bubble, subtle at first, then sharper. She turned to him with a question, one last attempt at clarity, and found his expression unreadable, a mask that revealed nothing, yet hinted at everything. And then, before she could process what was happening, the world around Maria seemed to tilt, the path ahead narrowed, shadows lengthened unnaturally. And in that instant, the warmth and charm she had felt for days dissolved into disorientation and dread. She reached for her phone, for reassurance, for a lifeline, but the signal flickered and died, leaving her alone with a man whose carefully constructed persona concealed intentions she could not yet imagine. Her last thought, sharp, piercing, was of her son, her apartment, the life she was abruptly being pulled away from, and that's when she vanished. If this part is gripping you, drop a comment with, "I'm still here." We want to see who's following this story closely. By the time evening settled over the city, Maria had not returned. Her friends tried calling, texting, and reaching out, each unanswered message amplifying the gnawing fear that something had gone terribly wrong. By nightfall, her sister, Claire, had convinced herself that this was no ordinary delay. She contacted the local authorities, and within hours, the small police station downtown had officially logged a missing person report. The next morning, a coordinated search was underway. Officers fanned out across the city streets, canvassing neighborhoods, scanning parking lots, and checking surveillance footage from nearby stores. A helicopter swept over the nearby forested areas, its spotlight cutting through the darkness, while search teams on foot combed the trails and paths Alexander had mentioned. Detectives began piecing together the timeline. Texts between Maria and Alexander, the GPS data from her phone, and the last known locations. Each lead seemed promising at first, only to twist into confusion. A hiker reported seeing a woman resembling Maria near a trailhead hours before her disappearance, but their description conflicted with the timestamps from Alexander's messages. Friends claimed he had seemed perfectly normal during his interactions online, but now questions mounted. Could someone so charming orchestrate such a disappearance? Social media exploded with speculation. Posts and comments poured in, friends and strangers alike sharing theories, some sympathetic, others accusatory. Headlines read, "Woman missing after online date," and "Charming stranger" or "Hidden threat." Amid the chaos, detectives discovered small but crucial pieces of evidence. Maria's phone, abandoned on a remote walking path, revealed a series of unsent texts to her sister, warnings that hinted at sudden fear. Security footage from nearby cafes and gas stations traced Alexander's SUV along roads far outside the usual city routes. Analysts combed through his digital footprint, uncovering inconsistencies in his identity, false work histories, and online profiles that did not match public records. Friends and neighbors provided accounts of Alexander's calm but strangely private nature. His apartment seemed orderly, almost sterile, as though nothing personal ever truly existed there. But even with these clues, the case remained tangled. Investigators chased leads that led nowhere, revisited conflicting witness statements, and faced the frustration of dead ends. Each day brought new tips from the public, some credible, some wild, and the pressure mounted to find Maria before hope slipped entirely. The media followed relentlessly, publishing updates with urgency, while the public speculated endlessly. Had she been kidnapped? Had she run away? Or had something more sinister occurred? Detectives sifted through digital breadcrumbs, cross-referencing calls, texts, and online interactions, slowly constructing a picture that hinted at a man skilled at manipulation, someone who could hide dangerous intentions behind a charming smile. Then, 10 days into the search, a breakthrough came. A local resident hiking a secluded trail spotted fragments of personal belongings, items that, when confirmed, belonged to Maria. Phone logs traced her last steps, indicating a sudden and unexpected deviation from her planned route. And finally, investigators discovered the chilling trail leading back to Alexander, inconsistencies in his stories, unexplained absences, and a pattern of behavior that hinted at premeditation. Every lead pulled them closer, but the truth they uncovered was darker than anyone had imagined, revealing a carefully constructed facade, a life built on deception, and a reality that Maria had unknowingly stepped into. The detectives uncovered a shocking trail, but it was far worse than anyone imagined. As the investigation deepened, the authorities began peeling back layers of Alexander's carefully constructed life. What had once seemed like a charming, ordinary man with a successful career was quickly revealed as something else entirely. His identity, built meticulously over months on dating apps, was a fabrication. Alexander was not his real name, and his resume, his photos, even his address, had been falsified. Police records uncovered a trail of previous aliases, each linked to incidents involving women who had vanished under similar circumstances. It became clear that Maria had unknowingly stepped into a pattern, one that had played out multiple times before. The motive was chilling in its simplicity. Alexander targeted women who seemed independent, successful, and trusting. Through subtle manipulation, he would earn their confidence, isolate them emotionally, and lead them to situations where he had complete control. Detectives began connecting the dots, discovering that several unsolved missing persons cases in nearby provinces bore eerie similarities to Maria's disappearance. Phone records, social media interactions, and surveillance footage from past years suggested a calculated method, a pattern of premeditated manipulation designed to lure women into his web. When Alexander was finally located and taken into custody, the shock among Maria's friends and family was palpable. Claire recalled the day detectives arrived, her hands trembling as she listened to the official recounting of evidence. The inconsistencies, the timeline of his movements, the incriminating digital footprint. He seemed so normal, she whispered, the words heavy with disbelief and grief. Law enforcement detailed how Alexander's previous victims had managed to escape before harm came to them. But for Maria, the timing had been tragically different. Courtroom scenes later revealed the stark reality of his past actions. Family members of other victims spoke quietly, some holding back tears, while investigators explained how Alexander's deception extended far beyond what anyone had imagined. The emotional toll was immense. Friends of Maria struggled with anger, guilt, and sorrow. Could they have seen the warning signs? Could they have done more? Even the investigators admitted that while the physical evidence had finally tied Alexander to Maria's disappearance, understanding the psychological manipulation behind his actions was far more complex. In public statements, law enforcement emphasized the importance of vigilance, especially in the age of online dating, warning that charm could mask dangerous intentions. The climax of the revelation came when detectives presented the final pieces of evidence in court. Messages that showed Alexander monitoring Maria's movements, logs confirming he had arranged the location where she vanished, and testimonies from prior victims who described eerily similar patterns of grooming and control. Every revelation hit like a blow to those watching, driving home the reality of Maria's final days. The community, once shocked and confused, now confronted the horror of what had occurred, not just a single tragedy, but the outline of a criminal pattern meticulously hidden behind smiles, polite conversation, and false identities. But even as Alexander faced trial and the courtroom drama unfolded, the full extent of his crimes would only come to light later. Just when the case seemed to be reaching closure, investigators made a startling discovery. In a small storage unit linked to Alexander, they uncovered evidence suggesting that Maria had not been his only victim in recent months. Personal items, photographs, and journals pointed to other women who had crossed paths with him, some of whom had narrowly escaped harm. One of the most shocking findings was a hidden digital folder labeled with dates corresponding to when these women had met him. The level of meticulous planning, the cold precision, was almost impossible to comprehend. It was clear that Maria's disappearance was part of a larger, calculated pattern, and that for Alexander, charm had always been a tool of control. The revelation shook Maria's family to the core. Her sister, Emily, spoke quietly to investigators, her voice cracking. "I just want people to know who she really was, not just how she died." Friends launched online campaigns in her memory, sharing stories of her kindness, her love for hiking, her quiet devotion to her career, and her laughter that could light up a room. Survivor advocates began using Maria's story to raise awareness about the subtle dangers of online dating, warning that manipulation often begins long before physical harm occurs. Meanwhile, Alexander's trial revealed nuances that were nearly impossible to anticipate. While some of his crimes were undeniable, certain details of his confessions left the courtroom stunned. He admitted to fabricating his persona and manipulating victims, but denied premeditation in specific cases. These contradictions ignited heated debate over accountability and intent. Families listened silently as the legal system struggled to fully encapsulate the psychological damage he inflicted, emphasizing that justice can sometimes feel incomplete even when legal verdicts are delivered. By the end of the trial, Alexander was convicted, but the emotional ripple of his actions continued. Friends and family wrestled with questions they would carry for the rest of their lives. Could Maria's fate have been prevented? Was justice truly served? How easily charm can disguise danger, and how vigilant must one be in a world increasingly connected online? These questions lingered, leaving viewers to consider their own choices and the people they trust. The story concluded with a quiet reflection. Memorials for Maria adorned online tributes and local communities. Survivors' voices shared lessons of resilience, and advocacy campaigns grew in prominence. In her memory, friends urged others to approach new relationships with caution, to notice subtle red flags, and to trust their instincts. Maria's life, though tragically cut short, became a catalyst for awareness. a reminder of the fragility of trust and the invisible lines between love and danger. The final thought lingers. Would you have noticed the warning signs? Could this have happened to you? The questions remain long after the verdict, haunting and instructive, reminding us all of the delicate balance between connection and caution. Now that you've followed Maria's story from the first hopeful swipe to the shocking conclusion, the questions linger. What do you think really happened that night when she went to meet Alexander? Was there anything in his charm or her intuition that could have hinted at the danger she was stepping into? Take a moment to imagine yourself in Maria's shoes. How would you have felt scrolling through those messages, trusting someone you barely knew, and believing you had finally found love? Her story doesn't just end with loss. It's a cautionary tale about trust, intuition, and the hidden risks of online connections. And while we've uncovered the shocking truth about Alexander, there are countless stories like this, each with twists and turns that challenge everything we think we know about people we meet online. If this story left you stunned, stay tuned, because if you thought Maria's case was shocking, wait until you hear what happened in the next case, where deception and danger took a completely unexpected form. You won't want to miss it. Before we wrap up, I want to hear from you. Comment below. I read every single one of your thoughts. Tell me where you're watching from, share your feelings about Maria's story, or let us know if you've ever experienced something similar. Your voices are an important part of these discussions, helping us all reflect and learn from real-life experiences. And if this video shook you, hit the like button, share it with someone who needs to hear Maria's story. And don't forget to subscribe for more real-life crime twists, mysteries, and stories that make you question what's truly beneath the surface. The story of Maria may have ended tragically, but her legacy lives on through awareness, advocacy, and the conversations we continue to have. So, as you reflect on this story, ask yourself, how vigilant are you in the world of online connections? Could you spot the red flags before it was too late?